Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. So, if you've been following my channel, or just the American box office over the past couple weeks, the summer season seems to have started several times. I feel like it started kind of in April. People were saying, like, oh, this is the beginning of the summer season. And then there was, like, a movie that didn't do well. And then it was like, oh, never mind. It's actually starting in the end of April. And then something would do well and then not do well. And be like, oh, it's actually starting now. So we're into June at this point. There's no confusion here. We are in the summer movie season. And the box office has just been just to be completely honest, has been disappointing. Even in post-COVID terms, the box office this summer season, which I think I think we can say at least from the end of April, which seems to be the new summer season, has just been abysmal. That's not true. Abysmal is maybe the wrong word, but definitely disappointing. This weekend brought in domestically $65 million total, which was a 37% drop from the past weekend, which makes some sense because, there's really were no big movies opening this week, but considering that last weekend was also fairly disappointing in terms of, like, I think it was, like, one of the worst Memorial Day weekend box offices in, like, 30 years or something. So that makes a little bit of sense, but again, it's still disappointing to see. But again, you have to look at this stuff long term. There are going to be these ebbs and flows, but it is a little disappointing to see, again, a 37% drop, when this should be the busiest part of the year. So in terms of some openings, super quick, we basically at number 7, 8, and 9 in the top 10. At number 7, we have, I don't know how I'm going to pronounce this, Haikyuu, the exclamation point, the dumpster battle, which I guess is some anime film. I honestly, sorry, it's not on my radar. So if you're watching this and you're a Haikyuu dumpster battle fan, I apologize. Brought in only about $3.5 million for the weekend, but this brings its worldwide total to $80 million, 80. So clearly, without even needing to like look into it, it's obviously been having, its run worldwide, probably mostly in Japan. So that kind of, this is really just anything that it makes in the United States at this point is just icing on the cake. Also, number 8 and 9, we have In a Violent Nature and Ezra coming in at 2.1 and 1.2 million respectively. Again, these are smaller indie films. This is a sidebar. I have a bone to pick because in order to do my job of both doing reviews, but then also, making box office predictions, I gotta know what's actually opening in theaters and what's opening wide, right? So technically, the definition for a wide release has been 600 theaters or more. And typically I use the website firstshowing.net that I have found in the past to be fairly reliable. But apparently Box Office Mojo has a different release schedule that will have different movies. And not only will they have different movies, but like a movie will be listed as opening wide on First Showing, and then it'll be, say, limited on Box Office Mojo. So I was very confused, because I was trying to make predictions for these two movies, In a Violent Nature and Ezra, and I couldn't find any predictions. So I was like, okay, so that maybe it's not opening wide and no one's making box office predictions. These open in like over 1,000 theaters, which obviously is a small wide release, but it is still technically a wide release. So that's just a sidebar. It really annoys me, but in any case, that's why I didn't have any predictions last week if you were watching the live stream. But so this week is definitely dominated by returning content. Right? Things that are continuing into their second, third, fourth weeks. Things continuing directly into their second frame this week. We have the Garfield movie and Furiosa. So if you remember from last week, they basically were playing kind of ping pong back with which one would get the top spot. Ultimately, Furiosa got the number one spot at the domestic box office for the weekend. But now it's flipped. So Garfield is now at number 1. Bringing in about 14 million, roughly, give or take. It actually jumped from second to first place, like I said, and now in its second frame. And only a 42% drop. And I say only, like, of course, you'd want to see less than that, but that's not awful, right? Especially considering that the film has not gotten, like, super stellar reviews or anything. This brings its domestic total to about 52 million 52 million domestically, 152 million worldwide, off of just a $60 million budget. So there's a reason why studios make movies like this, right? You know, animated films based off of recognizable IP, because ultimately if you can keep the cost down, they make their budgets back, right? You definitely would like to see a better domestic return for a movie like this. It's a little disappointing probably to see that that the domestic box office only accounts for about a third of the worldwide box office. But in any case, it seems like the Garfield movie is on track to make back its money, if not make a little bit of profit, right? And then of course it surpassed the film that beat it last weekend, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, which, again, sidebar, I hate that title because that makes it sound like Furiosa is like Mad Max is the saga. Furiosa is not a Mad Max saga. Furiosa is part of the Mad Max saga. This does not matter, but it just really, really bugs me. So, like I had said, it was in number one, in the number one spot last week. It is now dropped from first to third in its second frame, suffering a 59% drop. Oof. Not the absolute worst that we've seen ever, but definitely not good, right? Especially considering that it had a pretty disappointing opening box office to begin with. This brings its domestic total to about 50 million and its worldwide total to 114, which, sounds decent, but this is all off of a $168 million budget. So, fairly expensive film. I have not seen it. I have heard really, really great things about it. I've seen clips from the film, and it seems incredible. I've also not seen Mad Max Fury Road, which I also know is incredible. It's one of those on my, it's on my list. I promise I'll get to it. But this is a little concerning, right? If you really, really like these films, they may not make another one. And to be fair, the original Mad Max Fury Road did not also open super huge, but it opened bigger than Furiosa did, and that was a decade ago. And even accounting for like inflation would only make it worse, right? In terms of comparing those metrics. So it just seems like audiences just have not come to this film, which makes sense again because it's a prequel to a film that itself was a continuation of a not super popular franchise. So again, we'll see if it has legs, and I think that's something that is changing about the American box office, is that for a decade, or really for decades, plural, but really in the past decade, or even 15 years, it's really been a focus of what's the opening weekend. If you have a giant drop, who gives a shit? As long as it makes a shit ton of money in the first weekend, who cares if there's a big drop? But what we're seeing now, especially post-COVID, films are not opening as big, but they're having if it's good, if it's a decent film, it will have those legs. It will kind of over time develop a following and a box office return the way that films did for most of its history. Most films, because the lack of home media, pre-VHS, pre-DVD, pre-streaming, films would be in theaters for way longer, right? Their story, I think it was something like the original Star Wars was in theaters for a year. 12 months plus. And we're not talking about specialty second run theaters, which were a thing, right? Because again, once they were out of the main theaters, then you would have specialty theaters that were hey, you saw this movie last year, you liked it, here it is at this theater for a cheaper price, right? So it was baked into the business model that films would make their money over time. It wasn't as important to have this huge splash, and a lot of the most successful films of all time are like that. And in fact, going back to the Star Wars example, it had a decent opening weekend, but I don't think it was one of the best opening weekends of all time. It just kept making bananas box office every weekend, right, for months. So I think that's what we're going to see here. And I think you're going to see that with a film here. I want you to try to guess what movie I'm thinking of. There's a movie in the box office here in the top 10 that I think is an example of how we're moving back to movies making their money more slowly over time. So if you think you know which one it is, if you look at the screen here, if you think you know which movie I'm talking about, drop it in the comments, and we'll see if anyone knows what I'm alluding to. Looking at number 2, though, it's If, and If is not necessarily Well, actually, maybe this is not the one I was thinking of, but let's talk about If. So, like Garfield, it jumped because Furiosa dropped so far. It jumped from third to second, now in its third frame. This was only a 33% drop. So, again, kind of like Garfield, it didn't have, like, a great reviews, but, again, that's a pretty decent drop. And so far, its domestic total is 80 million, which is, like, fairly impressive, and 138 million worldwide, just off of a $110 million budget. So it still has a little bit of a way to go to, double the budget, kind of break even. But again, for a film that I really have not seen anyone super excited about this, this could have some legs. This is not the film I was talking about, but this could have some legs. At number 4, we also have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, bringing in a humble 8.8 million. It held its 4th place spot in its 4th frame. This was, again, also only a 34% drop. So, again, this is a movie that I think will have legs and has shown to have some legs, but opened pretty big. At least in terms of what the expectations were. So this brings its total to 140 million domestically and 337 million worldwide off of just a $160 million budget. And now I'm gonna do this live. I'm pulling an audible. I'm gonna go on Box Office Mojo and look at the domestic. Yeah, so looking at the domestic box office for the entire year so far, just domestically. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is the 4th highest grossing film. Again, at that 140-ish million for the year, only behind Kung Fu Panda 4 at number 3, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire at number 2, and Doom Part 2 at number 1. So this has definitely been a pretty big success, which I don't think we were really expecting. So that's interesting that it's, and it's a good film. I was gonna review it, but then ended up getting really busy. I don't think it's as good as War for the Planet of the Apes, but I think it's on par with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, right? Like the second one in that rebooted trilogy. And then we come to number 5. I see no one commented in the live stream, which is disappointing, because if you had commented The Fall Guy as the film that I think is benefiting from having, strong legs, it would be this one. So it's still in the top 5 in its 5th frame, so it's been in theaters for over a month at this point. And it only had a 30% drop, right? Only made about 4.2 million for the weekend, but again, slowly but surely, that's 4.2 million that they didn't have before, right? And this brings its domestic total to about 80 million, and its worldwide total to 158 million. Again, off of a 150 million dollar budget. So again, still has a long way to go to double that budget, try to break even. But again, people were writing this off as like one of the biggest. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic about people being hyperbolic, but I feel like the narrative on this movie was like, this is a dud. It's going to streaming like two or 3 weeks after it was released. No one gives a shit about this. And I thought it was a good movie. It wasn't great, but I thought it was a lot of fun and a great kind of early summer season film to be in theaters. And I think word of mouth is kind of catching on of people being like, it's a fun time. It's like, it's not super long. It's an easy breezy viewing experience.